got a sheet. Sorry, we've got a lot of questions coming through.
Right.
So one of the questions that kind of moves on a little bit from the casks. Well, it's still about the casks. Richard has obviously got a little bit of inside information here. So he's asking, when will your own rum cask be ready for whiskey then? So I'm assuming you're seasoning some rum casks.
Well, yes and no. We spent a lot of time last year just kind of researching how to make rum, and what we found was there was some huge parallels with whiskey making, certainly with our focus of whiskey making in terms of the fermentation piece. And we found actually that making rum is totally different to making whiskey. And it was a really interesting project for us. So I won't go into loads of detail. That's another hour of conversation. But so we've ended up earlier this year, after kind of 12 months of research, we've made a few batches of rum. We've imported something called panela, which is basically dried or desiccated sugarcane syrup. It arrives in a kind of cake form. And yeah, we imported 3 tons from South America, and we basically did our own rum fermentations. And so we've now got 7 casks of rum aging, but it's it's rum that's been fermented in Derbyshire. So the whole, we've made it here. It's no one else's. And yeah, we're hoping to bottle that. Obviously, it's never going to be a blockbuster product given the volumes that we're making, but we really think it's really great. We're really kind of proud of the fact that we've made this rum in Derbyshire, and we did a lot of kind of groundwork to understand how to make it. And then, for example, we've ended up with 14-day fermentations, and you'd be kind of looked at fairly crazy if you did that in whiskey. But the more rum distillers we spoke to, the more it became apparent that that really long fermentation was kind of where the flavors were at. So so we've got these casks. We are looking to bottle some next year, and then we'll see as and when we're happy with it. But we've just ordered another several tons of this product from South America. It's now at the distillery, so we're going to plan to kind of try and do this on a regular basis. And one of the things we were excited about is doing a rum cask finish. But I think what I'm even more excited about is that it's our rum. It's not someone else's rum cask finish. It's not a seasoned cask. It's our rum. And so, and who knows, how well that will work with our whiskey. We haven't got there yet. But again, in terms of kind of authenticity, I mean, it's a well-used word, but in terms of Derbyshire provenance, for us, this is all very important. It's all part of our DNA in terms of whiskey making. So, if we were going to do something else like a rum, we wanted to kind of employ the same philosophy. So yes, the rum casks, it's going to be, there's not going to be loads and loads of them, but we're pretty excited about that for the future.
Yeah, I love that fact that you've kind of gone one step further than we've done as a distillery. So we bought some spirit into to mature in casks, then to put our own spirit in. But you've obviously made the rum yourself, which kind of in there you've sort of said that spirit will be going into there, and you mentioned finish, which was one of the questions that somebody's asked. So are you looking to do some finishes, or are you trying to do more full maturations?
I mean, so we'll probably look at both. We really haven't sort of made our mind up on that. I suspect initially the bottlings will probably be rum cask finishes.
I mean, sort of even with like sherry or something like that in the future, is it something that you may put a program in to do finishes, or will it just be, we'll do some finishes as and when we decide to do it?
Yeah, it's probably more the latter. We certainly haven't got any hard and fast rules. And I mean, in terms of sherry in general, we kind of decided that that wasn't necessarily going to be our house style. Although having said that, you do get a lot of richness out of the STR cask, I guess, in some ways, in a similar way. And the other thing is, just being totally honest, good sherry butts are very expensive. So, to some extent, again, that kind of that does, it does condition some of the options when you're looking at your wood program.
Yeah. And sort of talking about whiskey and mature whiskey, and kind of jumping back to getting the English distilleries all together and things like this, Dave's kind of come up with a pretty interesting question, which I know has been floating around the industry for a bit. What do you think to the 3-year rule? Do you think we need to change that for an English whiskey, or just basically say, look, we don't need to be 3 years to call it whiskey, we can bring it back? Because everybody thinks 3 years is the absolute minimum we should be doing, but we can make our own rules up, obviously.
Yeah, well, it's it's an interesting question. I think, on the one hand, I guess it came about, fairly in an arbitrary way back in the day. And, who's to say whether something that's 2.5 years as opposed to 3.5 years, isn't really great quality and interesting to drink. I think, sometimes you perhaps need a bit of a practical, eye on, looking beyond our shores, whether there's just so much, education or, dialogue to have with the kind of global whiskey consumer on that sort of, on that 3-year point, when we're already, we've already got a sort of our work cut out in terms of establishing the English whiskey category. That, my personal view is that, that would potentially make life quite hard in terms of trying to, convince people who, have long had this kind of, knowledge that whiskey has to be aged for 3 years, that, we're doing it different, and we're a new category. I think that particular thing is quite difficult to take on. So I think theoretically it's nice to have the discussion. I just think the challenges in the markets are pretty high, and maybe you end up with people perhaps thinking, well, perhaps maybe they've shortened this 3 years for expediency reasons, so they can get product out there. And so it becomes a dialogue about that rather than necessarily about quality.
Yeah, and I mean, sort of within the same question, I know when I spoke to you at Harrow last year, I think it was, rather than this year, obviously this is where I got the bottle from you, which is interesting because it's obviously under a small heading of spirits rather than whiskey, and it's White Peak single malt. So do you think that's the way forward, rather than actually calling it White Peak single malt whiskey because it's under 3 years old? Or do you think, like we say, that it's just a case of, obviously I'm not trying to say that you're misleading, and I don't mean it in that way at all, but that's a way round, because you kind of think it's whiskey, but it's malt, it's not whiskey, it's still spirit because it's still labelled there. If you get what I mean.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Simon. So I think this then comes back to individual decision that a distillery might make, rather than, let's just say, the category as a whole. And if people are somehow misled by that description, then that's certainly not, from my point of view, that's not intentional. I think providing you're transparent about what's going in the bottle, then I see no problem with that. And in actual fact, the question's timely, because we are going to release a 2-year aged single malt spirit this side of Christmas. We've toyed with the idea for a while. There's kind of pros and cons, but we just felt that it was the right thing for us to do at this time. So yeah, so we are going to be doing that, and yeah, we won't be using the word whiskey, obviously. It'll be very, very clear on the label that it's been aged for 2 years.
Don't you find that frustrating though, Max, that you can't call it whiskey? Because it is fucking whiskey, isn't it? I mean, the bottom line, it's fucking whiskey. You made it as same as, I mean, so 3 years in a bit of wood, suddenly it becomes whiskey. It infuriates me. There's no minimum age in the US whiskey. You know, we bottled 11-month-old bourbon that you would never know was 11-month. Most of Chip Tate's stuff, I worked with Chip Tate a long time ago. Most of Chip Tate's stuff was around between 9 and 18 months of Balcones. When we were playing with it. It's just so infuriating that this rule came out through almost as a response to not full prohibition in, you know, before the First World War. Lloyd George, you know, wanted to prohibition completely, and this was a, you know, the 3-year rule was to stop. You know, everyone thought unaged alcohol got people drunk. That was the bottom line, and by putting it in wood, you became, you know, if you drank it while it was mature, you were more mature, and you wouldn't go out and fight. And you know, it really is such nonsense when you look back in the history of this magic 3-year rule. I mean, go back and look in the history books. It was a, you know, nothing to do with quality. You can put whiskey in a 3 years for a shagged out cask, which a lot of it does go in for the low, you know, the bottom shelf blends, and it's not whiskey, but you know, something that's been in virgin oak for 11 months in bourbon or rye is a bloody great whiskey.
Yeah, David, look, I personally, I agree with, you know, everything you said, and it is very frustrating. You know, it's also, you know, it's difficult for, you know, small, well, very small distilleries like ourselves to try and, you know, I guess change those rules or, you know, lobby in some way you know, the kind of wider to consumer to, you know, understand exactly the point you've made. And I guess it's one of those things that I don't know, you sort of sometimes end up at a point where you've got to, you know, choose your battleground and where you have got resources and what you're going to put your shoulder behind. And yeah, I share a lot of, you know, of sympathy with everything you've said. I think it's just, you know, very difficult to kind of convince the wider consumer to, and I think it could happen. It would take some time, but it's, you know, the established brands aren't really going to be supportive of that, because why would they be? And so it's always going to be a bit of a battle that the small guys are going to have to fight.
Yeah, one of the problems you're always going to run into, given that, you know, English whiskey is, let's face it, still in its relative infancy. It's always going to be initially compared to people's experiences with whiskey, which is Scotch. And Scotch has that 3-year rule. They've got the more mature stock and things like that. And I'm not saying that I agree with the 3-year thing for English whiskey by any stretch, but the general rule of thumb will be a comparison to that. And you've got other factors as well, haven't you? You've got climate. I know, Dave, you were talking about an 11-month-old bourbon, and that's great and everything, but the climate is completely different over there than it is in Derbyshire, and than it is in Bedford, and it is in Lancashire.
Yeah, the 11-month one's from Aspen, Colorado. So, you know, it is a very different climate, absolutely. And, you know, Arkansas, 1-year-old bourbon, yeah. But most bourbon and rye don't have age statements, you know, unless it's straight and then it's 2 years old. But, yeah, 2-year-old whiskey is bloody good.
You've got a real opportunity at the minute. We've got a lot of distilleries like White Peak that are really on the fringe of releasing some really good stuff. And we know it's going to be good, let's face it, because we know what we're looking for. But I think, like Max says, your general consumers are going to see it, and they might not see something that's, say, 21 months or 24 months. They might sort of think, well, that's immature. That's not going to be good. They're not as educated, I guess, and not in a bad way. I'm not being condescending. It's you know, there's a lot of pros and cons for both arguments, I think, and it's you know, obviously the SWA have dictated everything for Scotch, and I think the general rule is that people are sort of mirroring that at the minute to create a bit of consistency, maybe. I don't know. It's something that I think needs to be addressed at some point, definitely.
I mean, my argument into that would be, if it's, to me, we should be allowed to call it whiskey. The only determining fact is, to me, it should be very clear on the label how old it is. And it shouldn't be a 24 and then small months. It should be, you know, very clear it's 24 months. Or if it's 24 months, it's a 2-year-old whiskey. Then to me, there shouldn't be any problem with that. If it's 2-year-old whiskey, it's like Dave said, it's still whiskey. Full stop. It's not a spirit, it's a whiskey. It's been matured, you know, let's call it a whiskey. But just make sure it's very, very clear exactly how old it is. Big silence now. So one of the questions, and you kind of already answered it partly, Max, was coming back to how you get your cask shipped over. And I know, I'm pretty sure you're the same as us, where you get them all shipped over whole.
We do, Soren. Yeah, we are experts in shipping air.
Yeah, yeah. Because I think it's you know, the big guys, you know, sort of the big distilleries up in Scotland, I'm pretty sure a lot of those will be shipped over, broken down, but that's probably because of the amount they're getting. Whereas I know sort of yourselves and our, you know, our distillery, we buy them already made up, and to us, probably the same as you as well, that there is a benefit of them coming still damp in a sense. You know, you've got that airtight cask that's still got some nice bourbon liquid in there that's going to help mature your whiskey anyway.
Yeah, absolutely, Soren. I mean, and there's, you know, again, it's more of a, you know, perhaps a romantic thing, but, you know, I just like the fact as well that these are unadulterated casks. You know, the bourbon's been dumped out of them, the bung's been stuck back in. You know, I take, you know, I take the word of Heaven Hills that they've been sent to us fresh, but they are, yeah, there is that kind of provenance there, which for me just feels right. But yeah, you're absolutely right. They're also going to stay fresh for a lot longer. And I have to say, you know, we've probably had problems with about 3 casks in, you know, we've had 3 shipment loads now. They're just really, really reliable. And that's really interesting to me, because they, you know, the coopers in, you know, in North America that made some of these casks, you'd forgive them for perhaps being, you know, a little bit more temperamental, because they're only making them for a one-use purpose, you know, if they're making them for the bourbon industry. But in terms of quality, you know, we've been absolutely satisfied with everything we've had. Yeah, and the fact they're whole to us is, you know, is a really important part of, you know, of our operation. Yeah,
and I think, to me, the benefit obviously is, and especially for the smaller guys like yourselves and us, if they do come over broken down, you know, we haven't got a lot of coopers down in England anyway. I think we've probably got 1 or 2 scattered about, but, you know, it then does become a massive extra cost to put them back together.
Yeah, yeah, and that's right. And you know, and as skilled as, you know, the big cooperages are in Scotland, I'm sure it's a real challenge to take something that was first put together in a hot environment in North America, you know, taken apart, shipped over to Scotland, and put that together in a cold environment. Yeah, that can't be easy.
No. Right. I mean, has anybody else got any questions for Max? Well, I'll open it up to everybody.
Can I ask about the Founders Clubs, please?
Yeah, go on. Yeah, I did see that earlier. Sorry for you. Yeah, go on.
That's okay. I'm interested in your Founders Club. You've got 2 different ones, 5 years and 10 years. Could you tell us about those? And on a very practical point of view, what happens if someone dies before their 5 years or 10 years is up? I've got COVID.
Okay. So the difference really is, well, it's actually principally only one thing. So we do an annual bottling for our Temperance Club members. In fact, the year 2 bottling was released yesterday. So our Temperance Club Members Day was yesterday. We managed to do something, you know, under all the COVID restrictions, but we had about, I think nearly 80 members down yesterday, phased over a 4-hour period to pick up their second bottle. But whether you're so if you're a 5-year member, you're going to get 5 bottlings once a year for 5 years. If you're a 10-year member, you're going to get those same 5 bottlings over that 5-year period. Then you'll continue to get bottlings sort of year 6 through 10. So this year's bottling was a 24-month aged spirit. The bottling from September last year was a 12-month aged spirit. That bottling, you know, we've kept some back for anyone that, you know, if anyone joins today, for example, then they're going to get both of those bottles from the get-go. Your kind of members pack, you know, the bits and bobs that you get are the same. You get a nice Temperance Club members key ring, you get a membership card, you can bring along some friends for a distillery tour, free distillery tour once a year. And then we've also give a discount for anything that we ever sell, except 2 things. We don't give the discount on casks, although that will be a non-issue very soon because we've nearly sold them all. And you don't get a discount if you buy another Temperance Club member for a friend. But other than that, we give a 10% discount for our Temperance Club members on anything we sell, either at the distillery or online. It was 5% initially, but we've increased that to 10% just recently. And then the final thing is the 10-year members, we do have a wall in the distillery where we've got brick slips. And the members have their names engraved on the brick, and then they're put on the wall. And it's in the still house, just opposite the stills. And it's basically a permanent memorial to people that joined the 10-year club, but also, you know, supported the distillery in its early days. So that's essentially the difference between 5 and 10. And we've had a few people join 5-year and then decide to upgrade to 10. So that's, you know, that's always a possibility. And I've put every single brick on that wall myself, which I'm pretty proud of. And so, again, it's just kind of there's a type of distillery we are. For us, these communities of people we have that are supporting us, you know, we want to have a relationship with them. So we're going to stop doing our members club once we've got another 58 members, because that will put us up to, I think, 220. It's not an enormous number of people, but there's a number of people that if they all decided to come to the distillery for our annual Temperance Club Members Day, then we can accommodate them all, show them a good time. And so for us, you know, we don't want to lose sight of the fact that, you know, we want to make sure we give people good value and a good experience as a member.
And can you remind me of the prices, please? Because it does sound very interesting.
Yeah, so the 5-year price, I can't remember. It's about, I think it's £360, which that includes VAT, so that's the cash price. And then the 10-year membership is £690. Again, that includes VAT.
Thank you. I love the idea of the bricks. I just think that's so stylish and lovely to be part of the history as well.
Right, so any more questions other than a Whiskey Circus cask?
I've got a couple, if I can ask.
Go on then.
Please. I'm just wondering how large your spirit stills are. How many litres?
Okay, yeah, so our wash still is 3,000 litres and our spirit still is 2,100 litres.
Cool. And what kind of flavour characteristics are you trying to get from your new name? Is it more like tropical fruits from your yeast, or is it more like kind of fresh? Or?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, it's more dried fruits. So certainly we're just finding that, yeah, that kind of bacterial phase of the fermentation, you know, kind of day 3, 4, and the esters that we're creating is, yeah, dried fruits, you know, raisins, figs to some extent are the kind of the fruit style that we're getting in our new make.
Ooh.
Anybody else? All saving it for when we stop recording. Right, well, I'll stop recording there then, Max. So I'll say thank you very much for coming on, giving us a pretty well-detailed chat about White Peak Distillery. And hopefully you can hang around for 5-10 minutes just to, because they'll all start asking you questions now. So thank you very much, and brilliant for coming on.
Yeah,
thanks, Max.
Simon.
That was brilliant.
Thanks for having me on. I've really appreciated it, and yeah, happy to hang around.
Oh, cheers, mate.